you could join us tonight. I posted on our group, there's my dog, cooking from scratch on Debbie's back porch, asking for ideas on videos that folks would like to have. And I've made a list, and one of the things that came up is chicken and dumplings. And so we're going to give chicken and dumplings a shot tonight. Now, to be honest with you, I make chicken and dumplings about once a decade. So every time I make them, I have to go back and look through recipes, remind myself of things. And I looked and found, oh my, there are so many recipes for chicken and dumplings out there. But there are very, very few that bear much resemblance to what I grew up with as chicken and dumplings. So I did what I often did when faced with a quandary. I called my mother and had her remind me of how she made chicken and dumplings. So we're going to make my mother's dumplings, and we're going to make my chicken, and we're going to put them together and have chicken and dumplings. I hope that you enjoy them, and I hope that you have ideas that you would like for us to work on and to make into videos, and that you'll join our group and share those with us. The link to the group will be in the comment section of this video, and I hope to see you there. Well, for chicken and dumplings, you need really good chicken and really good dumplings. Chicken and dumplings from my childhood was what you did when you had an old tough chicken or you had leftover pieces. We're going to actually use some nice chicken thighs, and I'm going to make the dumplings in the style that my family made them, as I said. And there's a couple of different kinds of chicken and dumplings, and they're all good. I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm saying this is how we do it. These will be a thin dumpling. They'll swell up some when they hit the water, but we're going to start out with something more like pie crust than biscuits, if that makes sense to you. So I'm going to start out using a pie crust recipe. It's not as necessary for it to be exact. It's kind of a close thing. Just work it until the dough feels right. But I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to use 2 cups of flour, and contrary to what I usually tell you, I'm not going to bother to sift it. I sifted this when I put it in the jar, and this is not, as I say, this is not such an exact thing. So I'm going to put in 2 cups of flour, and this is all-purpose flour, not self-rising. And when I say it's not exact, I don't mean you could do the same thing with 3 cups or 1 cup. I'm just saying there may be a little volume difference, and that's okay. A teaspoonful of salt, because this is all-purpose flour. And then I want to use a 1/3 of a cup of lard or butter. Now, this is a trick. You probably know this trick, but I didn't learn it until just a short time ago. To measure lard or butter in bulk, start with 1 cup of water and add the lard until you get 1 1/4 cups. There you go. And that way you don't have to worry about trying to put it in a cup. to measure it. Okay, there's my lard. Now we're gonna, normally I use a dough cutter for pie crust or a fork. I'm gonna attempt on purpose to make these tougher than pie crust and firmer than biscuits. So one of the rules about pie crust is you don't want to introduce the heat of your hands. You want everything to be really, really cold. With biscuits, you don't work it much. Those are the methods for keeping the tenderness in. So I'm on purpose going to introduce the heat of my hand, and I'm not going to use ice water. And I'm working this in until I get little pieces of shortening in here, because I'm going to distribute that more and incorporate it more than I would if I were making pie crust. I want a little toughness and firmness that I would never want in pie crust. I have here a cup of chicken bone broth that I made. I won't use that whole cup, I don't think, but I went ahead and measured out a cup. I want this to be pretty firm when I'm done, so I'm probably only going to use about 3/4 of that cup. And so I want just enough of the bone broth. You can use water. Don't use milk. I'm using the bone broth to have the chicken flavor all through the dumplings. The reason I say not to use milk is milk will make them fluffier. If you want really fluffy dumplings, you can use milk. I don't. I want a thinner, firmer dumpling. And I think that's enough. Yep. Now, what I've got here, I don't know how to explain to you the consistency you're looking for. When you're making biscuits, I always say you want the consistency of mashed potatoes. This should be much drier than that. But it's more moist and workable than pie crust. So let me wash my hands and come back, and we will roll these out and make dumplings. Be right back. Ready, here we go. I made the dumplings first because I'm going to refrigerate them for a while. And so I haven't even started my chicken yet. If you want to make your dumplings early in the morning or even the night before and refrigerate them, you can do that. Because as I think I said, chicken and dumplings is really not simple and it's really not easy. But they are so good, and after you do them a while, they do get easier. Now, I want to knead this just a little, not like you would your bread to bake. I want to incorporate a little bit more flour to get a little bit more stiffness. And working the dough makes it just a tad firmer. I don't want to say tougher. I think I've been saying tougher. Makes them firmer. I'm going to work half at a time. Okay. going to roll this out about as thin as we would a pie crust. I don't know if that's 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch, but you'll know how thick a pie crust is supposed to be. Pretty thin. And you don't have to worry too much about the shape that this takes, because I'm going to cut this into rectangles. Okay, there you go. As I say, it doesn't have to be any particular size. I want it big enough to hold up to the boiling water. If you have a pizza cutter, that's really good for this too. You can leave these in longer strips. There's nothing that calls for any particular size, except you just want them small enough to cook. Sprinkle them in flour, and then we're going to put them in a little bowl, stack them up. I'm going to roll out the other bit and the other little ball of dough and put this in the refrigerator covered with a plastic wrap for a couple hours, and then I'll have them ready when the chicken is ready. Be right back. Well, as I said, for good chicken and dumplings, you need good dumplings and you need good chicken. And there are all different kind of ways to achieve that. So some people take a chicken or chicken pieces and spice up some water and boil them. And then take the chicken off and boil the bones for the broth. And after the bones have been broken and boiled and the broth is made, then they go forward with the rest of the preparation. We're going to do it a little bit different. You can do it that way, and that is fine. But I'm starting out with boneless chicken. So I'm using my bone broth that I made ahead of time. That's easier for me, and because I have a lot of bone broth, I look for ways to use it. Two different schools of thought on vegetables. Some people put a lot of vegetables in their chicken and dumplings, and some people say no, no, no vegetables at all. Well, I'm neither one. I'm not really a purist on this, except that I think the vegetables need to be limited because this is chicken and dumplings, not chicken noodle soup. So I've started out here with a half a stick of butter. I've reserved a half a stick for a little bit later. And while I'm not a big proponent of a lot of vegetables in chicken and dumplings, what I have here is the makings of a mirepoix. And that is something I start almost all of my casserole type dishes with. I've chopped this one fairly fine. This is all the vegetables that's going in here. And the purpose of these is to create a flavor base for the dish. the aromatics of the carrots, onions, and celery add a good base of flavor. I'm also going to add just about a teaspoonful of minced garlic. And this is really all the spices, except for a little salt and pepper, that go in this dish. You get the flavors from the chicken. And I've mentioned this before, chicken tastes good. I really never understand why people go to such lengths to cover up the flavor of the chicken. They were going to kick it up a notch and put lots of hot stuff in it. You don't really need that. The chicken is good, and this is a way for you to bring out a lot of chicken flavor. Now I'm going to turn the heat up on this. I'm going to let it sizzle, and I'll be back. While our mirepoix is sizzling away, we're getting a little browning there. And that browning indicates flavor. It's not just about color. So I'm going to put the chicken in, and if you don't want these vegetables in your chicken and dumplings, you can certainly take them out. Now that they've given up their flavor, I'm not going to. I'm going to leave them in. These chicken thighs have been dried and salted. All I'm doing here is I'm going to cook them up a bit, let them get a little browning on them. Because the flavor of that browning is going to lend itself to our chicken and dumplings. So I'm turning the heat down a little bit, and I'm going to cover these and let them cook done. Probably will take about 20 minutes. And I'll be back to you. Well, welcome back for a minute. There's a lot of noise going on in my house right now. I just want to turn these and show you the little bit of brown. That I'm getting. It's been about 10 minutes. We'll be back again in about 10 more. Okay, we're back. And we're going to do our next step. You can see our chicken has a little color to it. And the veggies have cooked down. So we're going to take this out now. And let it cool. And we're going to chop it up. Put it into little tiny pieces. And I'm going to take out some of this, which is really brown, some of these vegetables. Now I have here a ½ cup of flour. That's much less than you would put in if you were making gravy or most sauces. Because I don't really want to thicken this up a lot. I just want to kind of give it a creamy texture. I'm going to let that brown. And the last little bits of vegetables that are in there, the mirepoix, are cooking. They've cooked done. They're breaking up into small pieces. And I'm going to add bone broth. If you have boiled your chicken instead of doing it like I did, you would have broth from boiling the chicken. And that was almost a whole quart. That was what was left from the broth that I used to make the noodles. And I have here a second quart. That I hope I can open. Home canned broth. So now we've got about 2 quarts of liquid in there. So you know that that half cup of flour is not going to thicken a whole lot. It'll just thicken a little bit. So I'm going to let this cook for about another 10 minutes. Going to let that flavor come all through the broth. I'm turning this on a 4 out of 9, so it's a little bit less than medium heat. We'll come back in about 10 minutes. Well, we've let this simmer about 10 minutes or so. I've taken the lid off and turned the heat up. All I can tell you is the smell of this is so great that my little dog that you hear all the time, the one that sounds like a pig, is standing at the stove staring at the pot. And so that's a reason to discuss, truly, why I do it this way instead of boiling the chicken. I've taken this chicken and chopped it up, cooled off enough for me to chop it up, and of course you know I had to taste it. And the flavor is so rich and so deep. Because when you're making chicken and dumplings, you want not only good dumplings, but good chicken. I've tasted this, and now is the time to add a little bit of salt. And while I'm not a big black pepper fan, I'm going to add a little black pepper to this. And this is coming to a boil, and it needs to come to a boil. I'm going to add the chicken back. And this was 4 chicken thighs. And the little bit of vegetable that didn't totally cook up. And that dark color you see, which looks a little bit different than I think you may think of in chicken and dumplings, is because I browned the chicken, I browned the vegetables, and I used bone broth that was cooked for many, many hours before I canned it. So we're waiting for it to come to a full boil, and I've just taken our dumplings out of the refrigerator. Here we go. We have the bubbles breaking. I'm going to drop these noodles in, these dumplings in, kind of slowly, one at a time. And I put the chicken in before I put the dumplings in because we really don't want to be doing a lot of stirring after the dumplings get in. I'm dropping them in kind of slowly because I don't want the temperature to come down. If you'll remember, I only added, even though I had 2 quarts of broth, I only added a ½ cup of flour. There's flour on these noodles, and it's going to add to the creamy texture of the finished product. You see the texture of these noodles. They'll stand up to handling. Okay, I'm going to finish dropping these in and I'll be back. I have all the noodles in. And I want you to see, this is a pot full, and you can see the noodles staying separate and holding up to the boiling. I'm going to let them boil 3 or 4 minutes. Then I'll do a stir to make sure the ones on the top get on the bottom. And then we will be ready to plate this up and have dinner. I will be back to you shortly. Well, there you have it, chicken and dumplings. And I'll say again, what this chicken and dumplings is about is that the chicken is as good as the dumplings. Thank you for joining us on Debbie's Back Porch. Hope to see you again tomorrow.